Hello, everyone, and welcome back. This is going to be the final session for day 3 of Dare to Be Great, the virtual event that is for Dispatch by Dispatch. I'm excited for this session. We have got Imagine the Possible by Brad Flanagan. Take it away, my friend.
Well, thank you so much. Hey, everybody. It's so exciting to be here and to get to really, close out the day. It's been a ton of great information today, and I'm so excited to be able to be here and do this. Now, this class has been one that I've done a few times just talking about technology and everything like that. And I just really kind of rebuilt everything because it's been changing so much so fast. And over the past couple of years, as we've been going through and looking at what is possible, that level has shifted so much that I'm just so excited to be here and to play with you guys and talk about all this stuff. So if you have thoughts or things that you want to talk about or anything else that you think of as it's coming through, please throw it into the chat. We'll jump in and we'll talk about anything you guys want to as we're going through this. Now, my name is Brad Flanagan. I'm the director of the PSAP Ambassador Program with Prepared. I've done a ton of stuff in NINA. So right now I'm the vice president of the NINA Institute Board, chair of the Future Think Committee. And that's where a lot of this stuff comes from, is that idea that, what if we started forecasting? What if we started looking into the future and seeing really what's happening in the next 5, 10, and 20 years into the future, and seeing if these things are possible, what do we need to do to start doing them today? And what do we need to start building to make sure that we're ready for this? And a big part of that is getting out and talking to people, because very much, we're running into this world where we had so many fears. When I first started back in 2009, we talked a lot about text to 911 and how much it was going to affect us and what was going to happen. And it's going to inundate us. And the drama and the trauma that we're going to be taking from this is going to be so severe that it will destroy PSAPs. And, that fear held for so many years. Just a couple of years ago, Colorado finally got most of the centers onto text to 911. And as we started looking at Future Think, we realized that, what? We need to start preparing now. We need to start looking at these things, because what we've been finding with a lot of the technology is there's a huge reticence, a huge fear, and then a wall. And once that wall is overcome, people are like, oh, well, that wasn't nearly what we thought it was going to be. This isn't nearly as traumatic as we were expecting. It didn't bury us in more stuff. It actually was super useful in certain cases. And that's a lot of the talk that we're trying to do, is just bringing awareness to what's happening and what's possible. So, take off your dispatcher hat and open up your minds and start thinking about, what is the things that we can do today. Now, right now in our centers, we're running into this space where we are now at a critical mass, that our dispatchers are doing so much, so often, with mandatory overtime, with staffing levels that aren't the best. And we're just doing all of these tasks all at once, to the point that we're just tired and burnt. And we're starting to see, as we have for years and years and years, that our people are lasting, you know, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, and then they're done, because there's just so much of it. And most of the time, and even in the studies, like if you look at the NINA Pulse of 911 study, most of the stress isn't from the calls. It's from the administration, it's from the red tape, it's from the constant going, it's from the overtime, it's from that boom, 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 boom. And we just keep bringing it in, and all we can do is take it. And so we just bring tighter and tighter and tighter until we've wrung everything out of them, and they they just don't have it left. And so they leave. Dispatch has become this catch-all for everything in public safety that, oh, if the police department doesn't have anybody to answer the front desk phone after hours, well, we'll just send it to dispatch. Well, animal control doesn't really have anybody because they're all out on the road. We'll just have dispatch do that. Oh, our records aren't going to be here at night, so we'll have dispatch do that too. And very quickly, we have become this place, because we're there all the time, that we are now taking on more and more and more. And it becomes this catch-all that becomes so stressful, because now not only do you have to know what's happening with your emergencies, and not only do you have to be able to think on your feet and react and be empathetic and problem solve for these people in real emergency situations, but now you also have to remember when parking is open. And if somebody wants to pay their parking ticket versus complain about a parking ticket, you have to know where that's happening. And we have all of these, nothing datas that are coming into us, that it just builds and builds on that stress. And we're doing more of this. The nice part is since COVID and since we saw the Great Resignation, uh, I've been very blessed to, of late, get to see lots and lots of centers across the country. Just yesterday I was in Greeley, Colorado, and Littleton, Colorado, or in Aurora, Colorado, and got to see their centers, got to talk with their staff, got to do a sit along and just hang out. And staffing levels are starting to come back up in a lot of centers. But all that means is we're doing more with the same staff that we have for so many years. And we're continuing to add more and more onto their plates. And it just becomes so hard. So, what do we start doing about this? Well, what we saw back in the day was, in the early or the late 20th century, we went from cards to going into CAD systems. Now, I'm sure none of you on this got to do cards, but when CAD's down, you still get to practice every once in a while. But that paper to CAD transition was significant. We went from trying to keep up, writing as fast as we could, getting the data that we could get going, pushing things through wires and racks and card holders to, this system where CAD now gave us so much more. It was a huge deal to get the ability to have a computer help us with our dispatching and processing. And we had all of this stuff that was more at our fingertips. If I wanted to be able to validate an address, well, I didn't have to scan through my MTAG. I didn't have to run through or just write down what I thought was a good address and then have them hopefully get there, or I didn't have to start looking up policies manually and flipping through the policy book, or God forbid you're using cards for your EMD, that you're flipping through your card books as you're starting to talk to people. And all of those things were just a distraction from what we were doing with our citizens, with our units, that we were distracted by all of that. Well, CAD gave us the ability to have so much more data, that we had it at our fingertips. If we wanted to look up a phone number of somebody, boom, it was right there. If we wanted to see if they had a contact before, hey, we've got the ability to look that up. We now can see all of our units in one place. And we might even have a map that shows all of them where they're supposed to be. And it was just so much more data that they could start using and start working with. And what that caused is it gave us an assistive technology that made our abilities within dispatch 10x, that we got 10 times better because we have technology that was really organizing all of the stuff that we were doing manually before. And we saw this 10x increase in our abilities to track units, to give updates, to have real-time information at our fingertips that was just there to present. Well, we had that for a while, and as our abilities increased, just the requirements kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, until now CAD and call taking and the information that they store is so much. So, really, over the past 5 years, I've been talking about technology. I've been talking about some of these things. I've been saying, there's going to be a shift. And I genuinely believe that 2025 is the beginning of a new era in 911. And that is going to be the era of assistive technology, that we've moved from CAD being that 10x multiplier and that piece that is so integrally important to whatever you're doing, to now having systems that are going to start giving you more than you had before. And we've seen a trickle of this coming in, from better geolocation services to starting to get into some transcriptions and translations and better connectivity with our units, with MDCs. But these assistives are really going to start providing us with significantly more bandwidth and ability. Just like from that pen and paper into CAD, we're going to see this transition from CAD into assistives that are going to give us that 10x. It's going to be able to provide more data simultaneously for us than we've ever had before. Instead of running through protocols, there may be places where that information will be prompted for you. Instead of doing incident recalls, where you're going through and having to rebuild an entire incident on a call for service, you're going to start seeing that happens almost immediately for you. And it's saving you all of that pen and paper work that we're doing and building it into systems that provide the things that you need in the moment to do a job that you're trained to do. Which is what? Well, for me, my dispatchers and my call takers, I want them to be present with that caller. I want them to be able to be empathetic. I want them to figure out solutions and help these people get better. I want my dispatchers to be able to, follow their units, not scramble because somebody did a traffic stop in the wrong order, because they're trying to keep up typing. And God knows, on a busy law channel, you've got 35 things happening at once and you're just typing as fast as you can just to keep up. Well, imagine if you didn't have to keep up and you're listening and verifying and making sure that everything's happening and jumping in where you need to. There's assistants that are being created today that will do that, so that instead of doing tasks, you will be problem solving. You will be working towards these better outcomes within your systems. Very really, up until today, we've had three core technologies, right? We've had radio, call handling, and CAD. And in the late 20th century, it was only radio and call handling. You had to have 911 calls coming in, and you had to be able to talk to units. Well, CAD showed such a benefit that it became that third core technology. And those core technologies are line itemed and budgeted out because they are so important to each one of these agencies. Well, in this new assistive era, there is this new fourth core technology, and that's going to be assistive tech. And it doesn't matter what that assistive tech is, but when we start looking at this as a requisite to be able to provide the level of service that we need to, and still save our people from wringing them out every single day, to giving them bandwidth, giving them the ability for this to now become a career for everybody, not the 10% of us that just are too dumb to leave. And we stay in it because we've got that passion and that drive and that love. Well, now we might be able to keep everybody. And just think how much better your centers are when people don't leave at 3 years. They leave at 15. And it's an amazing change in ability just by maintaining people. And very really, as we saw with CAD, the things that you're able to do and the tasks that you're able to accomplish are going to grow and change, so that we are able to shift into that entirely new market. So, for instance, right now, there's a lot of talk about, we are first responders. We are the ones that are moving into this new designation. and we're updating our job descriptions, we're updating everything that we're doing. But some of our tasks don't reflect that first responder status, right? These are things that that law enforcement officer, non-sworn techs can do, that animal control can do, the parking department does, that the court clerk answers. And those are those tasks that how can we realistically be pushing our first responder status when we're still doing all of these things that have nothing to do with these emergency responses that we've been trained and we've worked so hard to be the best at. So, what is this assistive technology? Well, a lot of times people look at assistive technology and they think automatically AI. Well, AI is a tool that's able to assist you, just like all those other things. And we'll talk about AI in a little bit. But very really, these assistive technologies that are coming out today are taking the data that is coming into you, that you have processed, that you have put into your systems, and it is starting to make sense out of that data and provide it to you in a way that really pushes your ability to make decisions based on that data. So instead of you having to look up phone numbers, what if the phone numbers that you may need are presented to you in your phone system because they're listening to the call and say, oh, they're looking for tow company. Here's the tow rotation and here's the next tow on that call instead of looking it up. Well, that's one, just that death by a thousand cuts removal that simple task. You're going to start getting much bigger real-time information, the kind of information that is critical in the middle of a call. In medium large centers, or even in the small centers that have supervisors that are able to be non in the call, non on the floor dispatching, they have the ability, while you're talking on the phone and they're reading your calls, to look things up and throw things in CAD and do all of that. Well, that's really helpful. Now imagine if on every single call, whether you're a small center or a giant center, you have access to that real-time information. We've all had the dispatcher in the background that's our social media, king or queen, that loves to dive in and start digging, right? Well, there's technologies right now that do that. As calls are coming in, as officers are saying, yeah, go ahead and find out about this person. Where do they normally hang out? Well, we've got software that can actually pull and aggregate all of that data so it's ready for you in real time. What about those recommendations? If you're on the line with somebody that's agonally breathing, having something say, we believe that this is agonal breathing, or they're in arrhythmia, or there's something like a swatting attempt. This isn't a human that you're talking to, and making recommendations based on what they're hearing. Or it's something as simple as you're going through a call, uh, being able to really look at the entire call for service as it's happening and saying, hey, maybe you should ask these 3 questions next. Hey, have you thought about the safety of this, or the scene safety on this? And just throwing in ideas for you as you're going. They were working on this in Europe a few years ago, and one of my mentors was there, and she was like, this is going to be game changing. And we're starting to see those things come into fruition here in the States. And it's providing you with the ability to have actionable items that you may not have been able to do before. And so, how do those look? Well, for a lot of this, I'm going to break it into the big trends that we've been seeing over the internationally over the last few years. And we're going to go into all of these because really, this is how we look at our lives. This is how we look at everything that we're doing in our personal lives. So why aren't we starting to build these into our professional lives? So the digital transformation. I cannot go anywhere without using Google Maps. I have to. I just use it. It gives me my directions, and I somehow magically arrive where I'm supposed to go, especially now that I'm traveling all over the place. I mean, folks, I've been on 44 planes in the last 2.5 months. If I didn't have Google Maps, I would never get anywhere. Back when I was in the Marine Corps, I was the worst about using maps to get us to places. I would get us 15, 20 clicks off in the middle of an operation, and that's a big deal. So, I use this every day. If I'm bored, I hop on my phone and I listen to, some Audible, or throw on my Amazon Music, and it's going to do it. Or, any sort of other technology. If I'm bored, I'll just jump on and watch Netflix or Hulu, and I can watch with people from all over the country. You know, our world is a digital world today, and we are still sitting in so many places that don't have that. Now, sensor data. As our world becomes more digitized, we're going to see many, many more things that are harvesting data or collecting data on citizens. So, for instance, in telematics or in smart cars, when if you've been in a Tesla or if you own a Tesla, they're mapping all the objects around them so that they can make decisions based on that for autonomous driving and for many other reasons. Well, that data would be very valuable. What about the traffic cams and the LPRs, or the license plate readers that we're using? These smart buildings that have window sensors that are listening and adjusting temperatures in buildings and saying, if there's a hot spot, who do we notify of this? What about Google and what about Waze? As you're using your maps, it's harvesting real-time data from everybody saying, hey, there's a slowdown here. Well, now imagine if all of that is brought into one place, and there's software that we're able to use to go in and start mediating that data. We can aggregate it from these different data points and start saying, hey, this and this and this we think are related, and it might be something that we want to take a look at. But they're doing all of this without a dispatcher having to tie it all together. We all know, especially during those big traffic accidents, the major intersection, we just get bombarded with phone calls, right? Well, what if a Tesla is driving by, has sensed and has mapped that there was a crash that occurred onto older vehicles that don't even have this? We've got a traffic cam that saw it, and now from this data sensor warehouse, the software is aggregating that and saying, hey, there was a crash at this intersection. Let's geofence this. Let's send the data back to dispatch saying, we believe that there's a crash at this location. You should send. And then any call that comes in within 30 meters of this, we're going to say, are you involved in this crash, or are you calling about this crash? If you are you involved? If you are involved, we're going to have you talk to somebody, in dispatch. But if you're not and you're just reporting it, yep, we're aware and we've already sent it. And all of this can happen before the first call into dispatch. So, with sensor data, we're really start working on, we're looking at and exploring, preemptive dispatching, how to get calls out before the first call happens. Another place where a lot of this data is happening is called digital twinning. So as we're building out these digital twins, and basically what a digital twin is it is a representation of a location in 3 dimensions digitally. And there are digital twinning of cities now where you can actually set up and have a perfect replica of your city. So as calls are coming in, as things are happening with all this other sensor data, you can now create scenarios. You can start developing other plans and actions based on real geographical information rather than representations on a map. This is going to be huge when we start looking at tabletops. When you say there is going to be a major catastrophe in this location, and the digital twin can take the sensor data from previous information, such as your traffic patterns, and say at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, this is the traffic patterns that we see typically, and this is what we're going to have to cordon off. What are we starting to see as far as calls, as far as placing our units, as far as getting the right apparatus there? And it starts providing us with more ingrained details of how we can start really looking at, preparation and planning and logistics in a way that we've never been able to before. And even for our first responders, you've got a firefighter and they're walking into a smoke-filled building. They now can see what's happening. So this image is actually a real image of a LiDAR radar that's going in and taking a picture of the inside of a pitch black smoke filled room. And they are able to see everything that's happening in this room, even though there's no visual, no light, no ability to see anything. So it's providing more and more data so that we're able to do just so many crazy new things with all of this. So what about our call data? We've got so many calls coming in. Now, I know most centers are 911 if they're, of course, in our industry, but we also get all of these non-emergent calls. And in my centers, well, we were taking, just in Pitkin, we were taking 100,000 calls a year, and we were creating maybe 50, 60,000 calls for service. Well, what are we doing with those other 40,000 calls? What what's the possibilities? What are we handling, a quarter of the time, or a third of the time, or almost half the time that we're not putting into CAD? Well, there's not really a way to know that right now. And if I can start seeing, oh, it's all parking, it's all parking department stuff. Well, now we've got the ability to start looking at that differently. Or just the idea of having the data from our calls in real time to be able to start doing something with that will change everything that we're doing. So this is a representation of transcriptions in calls. So as your call is happening in analog, there's the ability to start transcribing. Now, there's many companies that are doing this now, and it's amazing to start seeing this come into full fruition, where not only can you see the transcript on the call, but now they're starting to do something with that data. For instance, if somebody's speaking a foreign language, not only can it identify the language, but now it can start giving real translations in English to your callers or to your call takers so that they can actually see it and they can make determinations. My call takers in Pitkin, we started having them change the way they said it from, hold on, don't hang up. I'm going to get an interpreter on the line to tell me what's happening while I'm getting my interpreter. Because now we can get that information and start moving forward while we're waiting for our interpreters. And as we're dealing with interpreters, we start seeing a lot of things like, oh, well, if I've got a transcript and a translation, now I can start queuing my interpreters, which is something we've never been able to do before. And I don't know if you've had this experience, but like even something as simple as, does he have a gun? And then they start talking, and 45 seconds later, a minute and a half later, they come back and go, no. It's like, you guys just talked for a minute and a half. That's not what was said. And it gives us the ability to see what's happening in real time so that we can do that. And that's just with the audio from the call, some of the things that we can do. Now, one of the really big pieces when we start talking about all of this additional data and all of this additional stuff that's going to be coming in, well, most of that is going to have to be cloud-based. Most of it is going to go out to somewhere else, get processed, and then move back. And so we really have to start looking at our network resiliencies as a first piece, be it from natural disasters or from any of the other reasons with power outages, with targeted attacks. Being able to keep your network up is now becoming as important as keeping your power on. So really looking at these resistances, how are we going to do that? Well, there's lots of ways, but we're moving into satellite, being able to take that Starlink and using that as an additional data hub, using those things that aren't necessarily relied on hard networks, LTE with our cell networks. There are ways to start aggregating and bringing that data in as well. And our fibers and our microwaves and everything else. There are products out there today that will actually take, and instead of an if-then scenario where we've got our fiber coming in here, we're going to use that, and if that goes down, we have another fiber that we'll switch over to. And if we really need to, then we can go to, well, what if you were able to take all of those things and build a big pipe? And now your data is going over satellite, LTE, 2 fiber hops, and a microwave link. And as one doesn't work or there's a problem, well, it just shrinks the size of your pipe a little bit until you can get that back up and running. And that is going to be very key to getting into all of that piece. We talked about cloud-based systems a little bit, but as these companies grow and as the services that are being built continue, we're going to start seeing a lot more of the cloud-based systems and software as a service models. Now, there's a lot of benefit to that in some pretty substantial ways. For instance, I cannot hire somebody that can design AI systems. I mean, Chris Zwarski could do it up in Saginaw, but I just don't have the manpower or the knowledge personally to build a system and to maintain it and to troubleshoot it. But there are companies out there that that's all they do. It's right now hiring IT guys is so challenging because I want them to not only understand networks and I want them to not only understand public safety radio systems and CAD systems, but they have to be able to do the phone system too. And they have to be able to be an expert in all of these things just so that we can make sure that we're able to get the right tickets in, we're able to do the individual, agency specific things that we want to do. Well, if it's a cloud model, they have their teams that are specifically trained in that, and you have now a team of experts that can do that. It also allows you to start looking at your abilities to budget. With a lot of these systems, a CAD system before, when we would start looking at it, you're looking at a massive payout at the beginning and then maintenance throughout, right? And it was really, really challenging. The amount of money just to make that CAD system go in, just to get that call handling system, just to build those. And well, if we can do it where it's not as expensive on the front end and we have a set known quantity for 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the road, it may be the same price, but I can find 200 grand a lot easier than I can find 2 million in my budget. And it's a lot easier to swallow for my agencies to say 200 a year, okay, we can do that, versus we've got to come up with a very large, pile of cash today. So even up to with these networks, there's the ability to start doing remote dispatch. We've all started talking about, and we've heard from places like Fairfax and Alexandria, and there's a lot of agencies now that are doing some form of remote call taking, remote dispatching. And as we build this out, it's going to become more and more realistic to use virtual reality, to use just simple things like um, our networking security, to get in and to really have the ability to log in from anywhere to our CADs, our phones, and our radios. Now, the images you guys are looking at right now that is, of course, the way I do everything. It's AI generated, but we are working right now in Pitkin to build out a fully three-dimensional virtual CAD phone and radio system that you put on. Right now we're testing with MetaQuest 3, but we are actually using VR, building out 120 inches of workable space, and then having multiple inputs so that we can use one mouse and keyboard to interact with our phones, our CAD, and our radio. So what implications is that? Well, for me, what if I have to evacuate my center? Well, instead of us going to a backup PSAP, we can leave, go to a vehicle, go to an office building on the other side of town, plug back in to get our network through whatever, especially LTE and Starlink. And now we can put this on, and they have the exact same capabilities they have in their CAD system remotely. Now, I think it was what, 2 courses ago that we saw talking about tactical dispatching, incident dispatching. Well, what if your incident dispatcher had the ability to throw on some augmented reality glasses that give you the ability to now be able to put on a pair of glasses like these and have a full CAD system so that they're able to get into the same vehicle as everybody else and with a mouse and a keyboard can run an entire CAD incident just like anybody else from something like this. And we are, I would say, about a month, maybe 2 months from having a workable, usable demo for this. So if you happen to be at Nina's SBP, I would really recommend you coming and checking it out. We're going to have it there, and it's going to be pretty mind blowing. So just by good networks and by having the right, you know, capabilities with cloud-based systems and with these, it's opening up so many of our options on what we're going to be doing. And what if, imagine the possibility of virtualizing your PSAP altogether. Right now, we have taken our 911 center and because of the cost of living in Colorado, we split it up, and it is now a 4 satellite centers that are able to be interoperating between call takers and dispatchers, from one being in Basalt, one being in Aspen. They can work together, dispatch together, and the responders don't even know the difference. That we start getting into everything that it just opens up all of these possibilities. Well, now my call takers and my dispatchers don't have to drive an hour and a half to work. I lived 90 miles away from my PSAP, and during the summer it was an hour and a half drive. During the winter, that was a 3 or 4 hour drive sometimes. Well, if I can get everything into my office and I can still be there and I can still call take, I could still even use the radio through radio over IP. Well, why do we have to be there all the time? Now, many of our staff still wanted to be present. Many of our staff wanted to work together, and we worked those things out so that they could work in the same building, work in the same room, and have times to grow and interact with each other. But if they didn't want to do an hour drive, well, there was a PSAP that was within 5 or 10 minutes of them. They could jump in, log in, have a full console, and keep going. And a lot of what we're going to see in the future is meeting our people where they're at, finding ways to take the value of that person and maximize it by creating possibilities that their personality and their want to help and their teamwork are going to be the most critical aspects, instead of being able to type 35 words a minute, instead of being able to do some of these other things that we require today. Now, as we see in urbanization, as we see our populations grow, and as we see a lot more people coming into certain areas, we're starting to see bounces and bumps in call volumes all over the place. Now, these call volumes are typically our non-emergent calls. We're starting to find that about 60 to 75% of the calls that come in are non-emergent. Well, that is what's overwhelming our systems. I can't tell you how many times when I had a crash and a structure fire going on, we were putting people on hold 5, 10, 15 times because it was like, I'm sorry, you said you needed a tow. Okay, where were you at? Right. All right. Well, okay, I'm sorry, I've got a 911. Please hold. And you would do that over and over again, trying to get to this non-emergent call that they could have done some other way. Well, what if we started automating some of those calls? And there are multiple companies now that are doing this non-emergent call handling automation, where they're using either large language models in an if and then format, breaking out each scenario. So like noise complaints, parking complaints, lost property, and they basically build out a model that can fill out the forms, that can do all the stuff and make people where a dispatcher doesn't have to talk to them. There's also agencies that are starting to develop the generative AI non-emergent call handling, where the bot has a retrievable local storage of information that says, here's the parking complaint policies, here's all of our policies. You're going to act as a call taker that will be able to field non-emergent calls. If anything is emergent or has a threat to life or property or a potential for threat to life or property, transfer it to dispatch. But otherwise, handle it the best you can. And we're finding that in some of these circumstances, up to 85% of the non-emergent call volume is being handled completely by these bots. And everybody says, well, I'm scared to death. What? I don't want to talk to a robot. It's going to sound weird. It's going to take forever. We've all been on hold with United and we've seen how it works. But we automated our front counters for the police department and the sheriff's office, and we waited to see. Now, in Aspen, Colorado, we have lots of millionaires and even a large handful, in fact, more billionaires per capita than any place else in the country. And we were just waiting because if millionaires like to do anything, they like to call and complain about things. And so we were like, we're going to turn on these bots and we're going to get all these complaints. And then we're going to do a really big media push to explain why we're doing this and why it's important and how we can't keep pushing everything back onto dispatch after hours. And we had everything ready to give this big media push once the complaints started coming in so we could tailor the complaints. And we got less than 1% of our call volume in complaints. What we started noticing is that people actually liked not having to go through a call tree. They liked the fact that they didn't have to bother a 911 dispatcher for their noise complaint that happened 4 days ago. They liked the fact that they could get the text into their cell phone to pay their parking ticket just by calling and asking, how do I pay my ticket? And it tells you. They like all of the features of it, and it really simplified everything that they were doing. And so what we're trying to do is find ways that will make the dispatch center and make our call takers have the bandwidth to be able to stay with their people, to be able to stay on the line with those emergencies, to be empathetic, especially when we start talking about, our the last class and domestic violence. And, there's nothing worse than in the middle of a DV situation when the phones explode and now you have to say, okay, stay on the line. Please don't hang up. I've got to grab this other call real quick just to make sure it's not an emergency. You go, dispatch, do you have an emergency? Yeah, my neighbor's dog, please hold. And you jump back to that. Imagine if that was fielded for you. The implications of us being able to handle the things that we're the best at, that we're the best trained at. It's game changing when we get into this. Now, what about automated dispatching? Well, with all this data that we've been getting with our calls and our summaries and our ability to get translation and everything else, well, as we start getting that information from our radio systems, what if your dispatcher didn't have to try and keep up and it was being transcribed for them? And now, not only is it being transcribed, but it's got the syntax, that it's got the ability to say, oh, that was a command. And if that was a command, here's the way it should be put into CAD. And then you take that CAD and it directly enters into your CAD and executes. So now your dispatcher is sitting, here's engine 62, I'm on scene, watches their CAD system and starts seeing, well, yeah, it put engine 62 on scene, on the right call. Okay, we're good. Now, my years as an operations supervisor, I was in a medium-sized PSAP, had about 54 employees. And as a supervisor, that's what I did all day. I would sit there and I would start looking. And as I heard things happening over the radio, I would stop and I would say, okay, did this dispatcher put this in the right place? Yep. Okay. Well, then we're good to go. Now, imagine if you have that another layer of security net that can really break down and you get the time and you've got the attention to be able to focus on did it get it right? And if not, what do we do to ensure that? So now that dispatcher, instead of having to keep up and do as much as they possibly can on their own, they've got the ability to really needle in and make sure that everything's more accurate than it was. So moving from that, and we've already talked about a ton of things. It's funny because the vast majority of these are either getting ready to go to market or are already happening in beta, in testing with multiple companies in the public safety world. If you're interested in any of that, please reach out to your vendors and say, I want to know how to do this, 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 and all these things that we've been talking about. And they'll be, a bunch of them are doing it. And it's amazing to see what's happening. Now, with our health and our aging, right? The first thing is our telecommunicators. We talk a ton about wellness. We talk a ton about the abilities that, we're seeing people coming out on medical leave for carpal tunnel. We're seeing mental health. It's a wonderful thing that like Dr. Michelle Lilly talking about post-traumatic stress disorder, and that these are true valid triggers of these genuine problems that we've had in our industry for so many years. Well, now, what if we're able to do something about some of those? The carpal tunnel piece is one that I've been working on a lot with the typing speed. Is how do I keep people from going out for surgeries on carpal tunnel? Well, what if they don't have to type? If we can start getting to a place where our automations and our transcriptions and our tasks are automated for us, that we're able to click and move rather than spending all day typing, well, now we've got a much better ability to start getting in and saying, well, we can eliminate carpal tunnel in 911. And that's a pretty powerful thing in its own. But what about that wellness piece? I've had staff come in and tender their resignation, and you're like, well, what happened? And they're like, it's just 6 months ago, I took this call and it all kind of changed after that I really struggled with calls after that. And it started getting harder, and it became more challenging for me. And I was just like, well, why didn't you tell me? Well, it's the same reason I didn't tell any of my supervisors or my directors when I was there, because I was tough. You got to be tough, and you got to put it, throw it over the shoulder and forget about it kind of thing. And that's not what happens. We all build in a lot of the stress, and it becomes so overwhelming at times. Well, what if we had the ability to watch the modulation in their voice, and we started looking at the syntax that we've used? There's been a couple of studies that have found that air traffic controllers in the military, while they're under significant stress, their syntax, the words that they choose to use on the radio, changes. When they are stressed after that incident and home life is stressing them out, they've noticed that the words that they choose to use on the radio change. Well, what if we can use that? What if we can get a baseline on each one of our call takers, each one of our dispatchers, and say, this is the way they normally talk with the ups and downs of their inflection and everything else. This is the words that they typically use on, say, in a 2-month period. These are the words that they use the vast majority of the time. And if we start seeing deviation from that, well, that might mean that they're going through something. That might mean that they're struggling with something. And we can start letting management know early, hey, check on this person, instead of 6 months later after it's been a downward decline, or a supervisor says, this person's been acting weird for like a month. What if we can start doing it in a week and say, how are you? What can I do to help you? Because our focus with everything that we do with technology is to help them, to help our people, and make it something that is more impactful and more helpful for them, so that they can keep helping everybody else in the world. And these are just amazing abilities that we have that aren't science fiction. These are things that we have the ability to do right now. The sentiment within AI, while it's listening to calls and while it's doing these things, can actually determine this person is angry, this person is happy. This sentence sounds like it should be angry, but he's saying it in a way that makes he's not upset about it. So that's weird. And they're able to give context around just modulation and word choice. So this is within our grasp today. And what about our aging populations? We talked about a lot of these sensor datas and we talked about all that. Well, our population, as baby boomers are aging out, right? They're calling it the silver tsunami as far as leaving the workforce. But after they're leaving the workforce, what's going to happen? There are not enough caretakers in the system today to be able to take care of all of these people. Well, a lot of them are going to be left on their own, or they're going to be put into facilities where they're not getting nearly the real-time treatment or notifications to nursing staff and everything else that they should have. So biometrics are becoming much more important in those assisted care facilities and these populations that now, as a patient is going into arrhythmia, automatically, not only does it notify the nurse, but instead of the nurse having to stop or tell somebody else to contact 911 because we need an ambulance at the care facility, they're able to automatically send that notification so that we can get the proper help to them. And it's just speeding up the response times while loosening the load on those call takers as they're running through all of these kind of calls. Now, in significant triage, there are places that you can now do arm banding. Now, have you guys ever seen this? It is if there's a significant major event, like an active shooter, where they've gone in, law enforcement or the EMS teams, as the law enforcement clears areas, goes in and starts triaging the patients, right, with armbands. It's like a slap bracelet that has a GPS on it, and they're color coded to say these people are good, these people are in need of help, but we don't know how bad it is yet. And these are the people that are in critical condition that need to be hit first. And as they run through, they just slap these bracelets on their wrists, whether it's a green, yellow, or red. And then the following teams can come in and grab the people and help much faster, because now we've got a GPS location on each one of them and who we need to get to first so that they can get through these buildings, clear them, and get them ready faster. And those are just some of the technologies that are coming with all this stuff. It is crazy the abilities that we're running into with every piece of this. Now, there's a lot of other tech that I've been talking about, I've been thinking about, I've talked to, seed companies. And what I found is that as long as we're open to the possibilities of what's happening, we are going to see a lot of new things coming that will be helpful. One of them that we were talking about, and it's a pretty interesting idea, is just tokening for first responders. A lot of places that they go into, and my patrol officers were the ones that actually thought about this. They were like, we have to go in almost every year and make sure that nobody's updated their Wi-Fi signals, because for like our hotels and our hospitals and our schools, because if they update them, well, if we go into some of these buildings, we don't have radio contact anymore. And if we can get on their Wi-Fi, at least we can get our radio over IP out. But we have to keep going and doing this. Is there any way that we can just automatically get updates from them? And it got me to thinking, and I started talking to some other people, and they were one of them happened to be a computer scientist, and he was like, well, we can do tokening. I was like, well, let's figure that out. And now they're working on a project to which they can automatically token from any Wi-Fi signal. So a home Wi-Fi, a building that has multiple new Wi-Fis in it, they can go in and just say, hey, I'm a law enforcement officer, give me some bandwidth. It doesn't mean that they see anything on their internet. It doesn't give you anybody's personal data or personal information. It's the companies that are now providing a new channel of Wi-Fi just for those officers that go into buildings. So now anywhere they go where there's Wi-Fi, they have the ability to communicate. And that's a simple, easy thing that just people are like, well, would it be possible if? And there's somebody out there that's like, not only is that possible, let's try and make it happen. So I really encourage everyone, as you're looking at the stressful things, as you're looking at the annoyances, as you're doing an incident review and you're just like, this took 3.5 hours. God, I wish I didn't have to deal with this. Well, look for those solutions, because the place that technology is at today, we have the ability to solve almost all of these as long as we're willing to just imagine the possible. So I wanted to thank you all for this time and being able to go through and just talking about what if with you guys. So I wanted to give a little bit of time to give people the opportunity. If you have questions or if you have other thoughts, I would love to talk to you guys about whatever you want at this point. So we've got about maybe 4 minutes left, or we're right at time, aren't we, Ricardo?
I'm here. I'm moving off to the side here. Hold on. There we go. uh,
Nice.
yeah, no, yeah, we've got just a few minutes here left, just like you were saying. So yeah, we're still good. I think one of the biggest things that I love that you put out there is that we need to be open minded. We need to be open minded and open to a lot of these new things because, as we've all said and we all know, nobody likes change, and people have the fear of the unknown. And you're talking about what tech folks and companies and everything else need to know. I put something in there. I wanted to explain what I meant, because I what I had put was I want them to understand the severity of their work and how it impacts the severity of our work. If you half-ass your work, you may cause stuff to break on our side and people could die. And the reason I say that too is because years ago, when I was working for In Digital, I was a communications director, and I was the one who was tasked one day. There was a college class that came in with aspiring software developers who wanted to work in 911. And they said, we want you to take them around, show them some of the stuff here, and then take them to the training room, and just kind of talk to them a little bit about what we do, but also give them just a little taste of what you used to do and what they are going to be impacting in the work that they do. And I said, "Are you sure you want me to do that?" And they said, "Well, yeah, why?" And I said, "Because I'm gonna be real with them." And he goes, "Well, they need to know." So I start telling them, some of these, just a couple hard stories, right? And then I was telling them, I said, The reason I'm telling you this is because I need you to understand how important the work is that you are doing, creating this software, these programs, whatever it might be, to help those in 911 and the stuff that they're doing." I said, "If you just happen to miss a period or a slash, something that's going to screw something up, your call or that call might be routed somewhere else, which is going to take more time for us to find where it's supposed to go, and someone could possibly die." And
Right.
there was a collective gasp, and I remember looking at the professor, and he was just but they understood, and I wanted them to make sure to understand that. And then, of course, I told them some funny calls and everything was fine, but I went back to my bosses and I said, "I did what I told you I was gonna do."
Well, and that's something that, I think that gap between what is possible and what people are aware of is goes both ways, right? Because,
Mhm,
as I get, and I've gotten to work with a whole lot of companies, especially of late, it, conveying the passion, conveying the risk, conveying the things that actually matter. It's great that we got a new button that does this thing, but it's about the call taker. It's about the dispatcher and the softwares that are being created and developed, and these, the virtual systems and the aggregated data. If it's not going to help us, and if it's not at a good enough rate, we're hindering people. We've seen this for years with this IoT that's come out, that we've got a million things that you've got one little thing that does this one little thing, and now you've got to remember a new login with a new link with a new tab on your Windows, and it just gets lost because there's so much doing so little.
Mhm.
Well, a lot of what we've been talking about lately, especially in Future Think, is single pane of glass. The more of these things that can get together, the more of these little one offs that become bigger and bigger pieces of the overall landscape of your four core technologies, you start seeing as they integrate, they become useful. And as you've got your geolocation and you've got your shot spotters and your traffic cams and you've got everything coming in. Well, now if it's all on the same map, that's amazingly useful. Whereas I don't have to go do 35 things. But the companies that are finding this, they're like, find a problem, solve a problem, sell it. No, no, no. Look at the problem, decide what it is, and then make a holistic approach that we all can use and benefit from.
What I also like, I'll say this really quick before we wrap up here. One of the other things I liked about everything that you were talking about here is one of the points is that you tied in um, uh, very well. You tied in the part about domestic violence and what Dalen was talking about. That yeah, if we're taking one of those calls and we have to put them on hold, how is also that making them feel? Like, we have to, but at the same time, it might I don't know this, right? Because I don't know how everyone thinks, but for what that person is going through, it might make them feel like, well, they don't care either. But they don't know, right? That person doesn't know that we have to go to that. But if there is some sort of mechanism somehow to have one of those other calls picked up there, like you said with that example that you had, that it was like, no, it's for this dogs barking or fireworks times or whatever. You're like, okay, and then you got to go back. You might have missed where what was originally something that was verbal, now it's physical, or now there's a weapon or something,
Right.
and you miss that part or you lose the call. So I dig that piece as well, where with new technology, um something like that could be possible.
Well, and I can't
Imagine
tell
the
you how many
possible.
times that I had to deal with that, right? That literally you just want to slam your phone down because it's like, dispatch, do you have an emergency? Yes. Okay. What's your emergency? Well, I got into a fender bender yesterday, and you're like, I've got somebody that's dying on the other end of the phone.
Hmm.
Go away. And I mean, it frustrates me. It frustrates that guy because his emergency is his emergency. And now, whatever situation was legitimately life threatening, I've put that at risk because of this nothing that I'm having to deal with on the other side. And the more of that we can get rid of, the more they can focus on saving a life, focused
Right.
on giving that attention. And just imagine, you've got your dispatchers, if they're able to be just that much more in tune and that much less frustrated by not taking those ridiculous calls, maybe they react just a little bit softer for somebody, and that person isn't as wound up when the cop shows up, and maybe it stops the officer from having to go hands on because the person's not pissed off because they went back and forth and got put on hold 37 times before the cop got out there. I mean, it's just those simple things, that butterfly effect, that all we're trying to do is make this easier, and if we can make it easier, it's going to change the world.
For sure. Thank you, man, very, very much for coming on, for sharing your knowledge for this presentation here for Dare to Be Great. This has been excellent. We had engagement going on in the comments and everything. When you mentioned the paper and cards, I was like, oh, I remember that shit. Yes.
Oh yeah, the worst.
Oh man. Well, for everyone who is watching, we are going to go live here in about 10 minutes on all of social media: Facebook, LinkedIn Live, X, YouTube, and Instagram. We'll be going live um, with Amy as well as Joe from the 360 Dispatcher. So make sure to check us out there. And we'll see you all tomorrow, also in the morning, bright and early, for our keynote session with Dr. Michelle Lilly. And her session is going to be What is Greatness? So we will see you all in the next one.